Hey everybody, it's Lon.TV, and we're taking a look today at the Google Pixel 8a smartphone. Every year we try to get one of these lower cost phones in to see how it stacks up, and this year they are releasing a phone at the low end with very few compromises. In fact, this feels a lot like the regular Pixel 8 phone, and if you go through the specs line by line, there's not much of a difference between the two. And we're going to take a closer look at this phone and what it's all about in just a second, but I do want to let you know, in the interest of full disclosure, that this came in free of charge from Google. However, they are not reviewing or approving what you're about to see before it was uploaded. No other compensation was received, and all the opinions you're about to hear are my own. So let's get into it now and see what this phone is all about. Now, the price point on this comes in at $499 with 128 gigabytes of storage. That's the phone that Google sent to us. There's also a 256 gigabyte version that sells for $559. Now, the specs on this phone are very similar to the other two Pixel 8 phones. Inside, it has a Google Tensor G3 processor, that's Google's custom silicon, along with 8 gigabytes of RAM. And this phone, as you'll see later on in the video, performs the same as the Pixel 8 and 8 Pro. So if performance is what you're after, you're going to get it here for less money. On the display side, this has a 6.1-inch OLED display. It supports HDR with 2000 nits of maximum brightness. It looks spectacular, and it has a glass front. Additionally, it runs at 120 Hertz for its refresh rate, so things feel very snappy and responsive here. And it feels very similar again to the regular Pixel 8 phone that might cost a little bit more. And the display resolution is the same on this phone as it is on the regular Pixel 8, coming in at 1080 by 2400, or about 430 pixels per inch. It is a very readable display that looks nice and is very responsive. The only place where they made some compromises is on the build quality. So on the 8 and 8 Pro, you've got a nice glass backing. This one is made out of plastic. It does, though, support wireless charging, which was nice to see, although it charges at only 7.5 watts and not the faster wireless charging that the other Pixel 8 phones support. But the front is glass. It feels very nice and thick. It is Gorilla Glass 3, so it should hold up quite well. You do have an aluminum band that goes around the phone here. It is definitely more visible on the white backing phone. I think they might make it a little darker on some of the other units. And it does give off a little bit of an iPhone 6 vibe. The bezels are a little larger than I would like on it, so it doesn't quite look like a flagship phone, but everything else on here inside really is up to flagship class, as you'll see as we work our way through the review here. Now, the weight on this comes in at around 188 grams. That's 6.63 ounces. It is also weatherproof, IP67 rated, so it can get splashed on. It has adequate dust protection with that rating, and it can survive a fall into a toilet or some other puddle of water if you happen to find yourself in that situation, but I would not go diving with it. Now, the battery on this phone is roughly the same size as the battery on the Pixel 8, although it is a bit smaller than the 8 Pro's battery. The battery life in my testing has been pretty good. I've been able to get through the day here with it. I live in an area with very minimal cell coverage, and my phones typically have to work harder to maintain the connection. So battery life for me has been all day and on par with other smartphones at this price point, at least in my testing. Now, as far as charging is concerned, you can, of course, use that wireless charging that I mentioned earlier. On the bottom here, you do have a USB Type-C port. This will support data devices. I plugged it into a docking station a little bit earlier and was able to use its USB ports and its Ethernet. However, it does not support video out, at least through the USB port. You have to cast it wirelessly to a Chromecast-compatible device otherwise. There is a SIM card tray here on the left-hand side, but no SD card slot. And the reason why there's no SD card support is because Google would be happy to sell you on a Google One account so you can store your photos in the cloud and pay for it. And that is why you can't upgrade the storage on these things. On the other side, you have your volume rocker and a power button. But as you can see here, there are no headphone jacks. You'll need to connect something over USB or use Bluetooth. Now, the camera system on these Google phones is always very good, and this phone is no exception. You've got two cameras on the back here. The main camera is a 64 megapixel, 26 millimeter wide angle lens with a 1.9 aperture. The camera on the Pixel 8 is a little better in my opinion just because it has a 1.7 aperture, which does allow for a little better low light performance, but Google often makes up for that with their software processing, and I've got image samples that I'll show you in a few minutes. There is also an ultra-wide lens here that shoots at 13 megapixels, but that ultra-wide lens doesn't do as well in low light given it only has a 2.2 aperture. Let's take a look though at some image samples so you can get a feel for things. This is out of the standard 64 megapixel lens here, and you can see the field of view that it has. It does shoot 4:3 as its default position for aspect ratio. This is the ultra wide, so you can see how much more of a scene you can pick up from the same spot. So not bad on that front. Here's a good shot out of the main camera, the 64 megapixel one, and you can get a feel for the level of detail that you can expect out of the camera. So all good there. Nothing here that looked all that much different than the prior Pixel models. Nice detail, very easy to work with the camera, and it does have a nice degree of natural bokeh as well. Bokeh being the background being blurred out. This is not a portrait photo. This was just naturally out of the lens there. Now it does have a portrait mode, and I can show you what that looks like here. So what it will try to do is guess where the subject is and then blur out the background, and it does a pretty nice job of that, but you do get some cloudiness around the edges of plants and hair and that sort of thing, and that's going to happen on even more expensive phones as well. But if you shoot it on just the regular shooting mode, as you can see here, you get a good amount of natural blur to begin with. And I did find the low light performance on the main lens to be quite good. You can take a look at this shot I did a little earlier in my dining room. It does get pretty dark, and as you can see, it's adequately exposed, and we've got a good amount of detail here, so much so that you can tell that these flowers are definitely fake. Now let's take a look at its video performance. Now the main camera will shoot at 4K at 60 frames per second. This is a video sample out of that camera. You also get a good amount of bokeh in video mode here as well off of that main lens, even at 60 frames per second. It looks very nice. One thing to note though is that the ultra-wide lens will only go to a maximum of 30 frames per second at 4K. So if you are shooting at 60, you can only shoot off the main lens, not the wide one. Now what you'll see when you're taking pictures or doing video is the 0.5 for the ultra wide, the 1x for the regular lens, and then you will find a 2 here. And what this is a digital zoom, because you do have a lot of resolution in the sensor to play with. But I did find when you were zooming in and shooting at 4K that images were not as crisp as they were at 1, because you're essentially doing a digital crop and zoom here. But what does work well on all the lenses is the stabilization. Now that main lens does have an optical image stabilizer, so that does make a big difference when you're walking around. But the digital stabilization on these phones is also quite good. So you will be able to get a very stable shot even when you're walking around with a heavy step like I was here. So all in, a very nice camera system for shooting video. Now this shot was taken with the ultra-wide lens. You can see it doesn't do as well when the lighting conditions aren't great, but when we got into the sun over here, it did look a lot better. And remember, 30 frames per second at 4K is the maximum you can do off of that ultra-wide lens. Now the selfie camera shoots at 13 megapixels at a 2.2 aperture. If it's too wide for you, they do have a small crop and zoom option here to get it to 1.4. It'll shoot video too at 4K at 30 frames per second or 1080p at 60. And this is a 4K image I shot a little bit earlier. Video quality is excellent, and if you are doing calls or just taking selfies, either video selfies or still selfies, I think it'll do quite well. So let's move on now to the phone's performance. It does have a fingerprint sensor that is under the screen, similar to prior versions, that will log you right in. It will also do facial recognition through the selfie camera also if you prefer that. Now one thing I noticed when I was outside with the phone in sunlight is that you can see the fingerprint sensor and its proximity sensor underneath the screen when you're in a very bright sunny environment. So you'll see a little box up here and then the fingerprint reader around here. It's not all that distracting. I found I only saw it when I was in direct sunlight and looking at a web page that had a white area of the screen. But if you happen to see that, it's not the screen burning in, it's just the sensor underneath it. Performance-wise, the phone feels great, largely because it's got the same processor as some of the other more expensive phones in Google's lineup. I'm on my Wi-Fi 6 network right now using its built-in Wi-Fi. And as you can see here, everything is super fast and responsive when we're browsing the web. Apps also will come to life very quickly on here. I don't think you'll have any issues doing email and some of the other things that you might be doing on your phone from day to day. Now, one of the fun things about owning a Pixel phone is that Google will bring new features to their devices first before other Android phones on the marketplace. And you can keep up with these new features as they become available inside of the Pixel Tips app. And there are a lot of things that these phones can do. I'm not going to go through all of them, but I'll show you a couple that are new and interesting. So they have this new feature here where you hold down your little bar here and then draw a circle around anything that you see on your screen, and that will prompt an image search. So for example, I just circled this device on my blog here, and it found that you can buy one over at Walmart here. It recognized that as an on 4K streaming box. Inside of the Photos app, they've got a couple of neat things here. So for example, I took a picture of my kids earlier. Let me flip the phone around to give you a little more screen real estate here. And you can see one daughter's got a nice face on, the other one's being a little goofy here. So if I go into Edit, I can then, I guess I got to flip it back here, I can go over to Tools and select the Best Take feature. And what it's going to do is look at the faces in the photo and then see some of the similar photos that were taken around the same time, and we'll do some AI magic to get the right faces in the right place. So you can see here, it actually fixed things for us right out of the gate. But if I wanted to make further adjustments here, I can pick either kid and change the facial expression from other photos that were taken earlier. So I like that one of kid number 2. My oldest here, I could actually give her a goofy face, go back to the original, or find that one that works. So you can combine photos using some of their AI features from multiple pictures into one perfect one, and they call that one Best Take. They've got another feature that allows you to erase things from the photo and then fill in the background using AI. Let me show you that real quick. So now if I click on Edit here on this photo and go over to this AI enhancement feature here, what I can do is draw a circle around this little bush here, and what it's going to do is detect it, and then when I click Erase here, it's going to pull that out, and then it will send some data up to Google servers and then have it generate an image behind what it thinks is behind that bush. So in the past, you could take something out of the image, but you wouldn't get something generated. So for example, here, it actually gave me a new walkway, which is pretty neat. So I'm going to hit the check box on that and save a copy of the image, and it will push down that generated image there. It's not perfect though. In fact, as you can see here, it's pretty blurry actually, so it does need a little bit more I think time to develop, but it does give you some idea as to where Google is going with some of these features, and it is pretty neat that now you can actually get rid of something in the background and regenerate the rest of the image, very similar to what you can do with Photoshop. Now, the features that you'll get dropped down to your phone over time are free. You don't have to pay any additional subscription fees. However, some of the features, like what we just saw with the photo generation, do require that you have storage space on your Google account to execute. And if you're out of space, the feature won't work. So you might find yourself having to purchase more space through a Google subscription to get it. But by and large, a lot of the features will work for free over the lifespan of the phone. The processor on board also has the ability to do some local lightweight AI processing. So the voice recorder can transcribe audio in real time. It's beginning to now differentiate speakers as well, which is pretty cool. And it will even summarize what it heard after you're done recording, all on device. So pretty neat little AI features that don't require any kind of cloud communication to get done. This phone will be supported by Google until 2031, 7 years from the date it was made. So I think that is pretty good as well. Let's take a look at some games, then we'll close things out. All right, first up, I ran a native Android game here. This is Roblox, which of course also makes use of your internet connection. And my kids told me it ran just fine. This is something that they play quite a bit, and they were pleased with the performance on the phone here, so I don't have any concerns about Android games here. And these Google Tensor chips, as you'll see in a minute, are not the fastest out there, but they are more than adequate and certainly perform above the average. And most developers target processors with less capabilities than these chips have. So I think overall you will not find any issues with Android games. Another thing I tried a little bit earlier was the Dolphin GameCube emulator. I'll start it up here. And I connected my Backbone controller to it via the USB-C port. And as you can see, it performs great here. The controller works fine. The game's frame rate is perfect. The audio was perfect. So all was good. And I think if you are looking to do some game emulation on this device, the target here is basically the GameCube and PS2 backwards. So you can do the Dreamcast, all of the older consoles like the PlayStation 1 and the Nintendo 64 and all the things that you might find in the early 90s and 80s. So all in, from an emulation standpoint, very good. I don't think you'll be able to do some of the more advanced ones that might do the Nintendo Switch or something like that, but you will find plenty of old games that you can boot up and play on this phone without issue. And on the 3D Mark Wildlife benchmark test, we got a score of 8,965 on the standard version of that test and 2,295 on the extreme version. It is pretty much right within the margin of error with what we saw out of the much more expensive Pixel 8 Pro. So as far as performance is concerned, Google is not dialing back this processor's performance on the lower end model. It's going to perform exactly the same as the 8 Pro does. If you were considering the iPhone SE, which is getting a bit long in the tooth, I think the current version's been out for about 2 years, the performance on the Pixel phone is a little bit better graphically, but pretty much in line with Apple's similar offering at this price point. Now, I did run the 3D Mark Wildlife stress test on the phone. It will lose about 27% of its performance when it's placed under heavy sustained load. So if you are gaming on the phone, you'll notice it might perform a little bit better initially than it does over the long haul, but it's pretty much in line with some of the other Pixel phones that I have looked at. So overall, a great performing phone at this price point. So overall, I am very pleased with this A phone from Google. They always try to deliver a lot of value in this segment of the market, and this one really takes it up a notch. You got the 120 hertz OLED display. The camera system is great on it. The performance is right up there with their flagship model. There's really not much to complain about here other than its dated looks. But if you can live with that and you don't need a really super expensive phone, I think you'll be very pleased with what you get out of this one. That's going to do it for now. Until next time, this is Lon.TV. Thanks for watching.
This channel is brought to you by the Lon.TV supporters, including gold level supporters Brian Parker, Budley, Hot Sauce and Video Games, Steve Green, and Amda Brown. If you want to help the channel, you can by contributing as little as $1 a month. Head over to lon.tv/support to learn more. And don't forget to subscribe. Visit lon.tv/s.